She protected the Alpha King's son from death, only to learn she was his fated Luna all along. The rain had not stopped for 3 days, and the border clinic smelled of wet wood, herbs, and old bandages. Elandra Voss liked it that way. It was a small building at the edge of the Ashgard territory, far from the palace and its noise, and she preferred it that way too. She was not a noble. She was not even truly part of any pack. She was a rogue-born healer who had learned her craft from an old woman who took her in when no one else would, and she had spent the last 6 years quietly mending the bodies of soldiers who never remembered her face once they walked out her door. That evening, she was boiling water for tea when she heard the horses. They were coming fast, too fast for a normal patrol, and there was something wrong in the sound of it, a kind of desperate unevenness that made her stomach tighten before she even understood why. She stepped outside just as the first horse burst through the tree line, riderless, its saddle empty and its flank torn open. Elandra did not think. She ran toward the road. What she found there was chaos. Several men lay scattered across the muddy path, some moving, some not. Swords glinted in the rain, and shouting still echoed from somewhere deeper in the trees, though the fighting itself seemed to be moving away, retreating into the dark. In the middle of it all, propped against the wheel of an overturned carriage, was a young man clutching his side, blood soaking through his shirt in a wide, spreading stain. She did not know that he was the son of the Alpha King. She did not know that his name was Kael, or that the crest on his ruined coat marked him as heir to the entire territory. She only saw a wound that would kill him within the hour if nobody did something. "Don't move," she said, dropping to her knees beside him. He looked at her with pain-glazed eyes. "Who?" "Don't talk either." She tore his shirt open at the side and pressed both hands hard against the wound. Warm blood slid between her fingers, but her hands did not shake. They never did. Whatever fear lived in her, it always waited politely until after the emergency was over. "You're going to help me get you off this road," she said. "It's not safe here. There are men who need. I can only carry one person at a time, and you're the one who's about to bleed out. Argue with me later." Somehow, between her strength and his stubborn will to stay conscious, they made it back to the clinic. She laid him on the table she used for the worst cases, the one with reinforced legs and a surface that had seen more blood than she liked to remember. She worked through the night, cleaning the wound, stitching what could be stitched, packing what could not yet be closed. She talked to him the entire time, not because she expected an answer, but because keeping a patient talking kept them anchored to the world. He answered anyway, in short bursts between gritted teeth. He told her his name was Kael. He did not tell her the rest. By morning, the fever had not taken him, and his breathing had steadied. Elandra allowed herself to sit back for the first time in hours, wiping her hands on a cloth that was far past clean. That was when he opened his eyes fully and looked at her. Really looked. And something in his expression changed entirely. He went still in a way that had nothing to do with the pain in his side. His nostrils flared slightly, and his eyes, which had been a tired brown moments before, flickered gold for just a heartbeat before returning to normal. Elandra noticed it, but she assumed it was simply blood loss playing tricks on his vision, or hers. "You should rest," she said. "You lost a lot of blood." "What's your name?" he asked instead. "Elandra." He said it quietly, like he was testing the shape of it in his mouth. "Elandra." Then, almost to himself, "Of course it would be you." She frowned. "You're not making sense. That's the blood loss talking." He didn't argue, but he didn't stop watching her either, and something about the way he watched her made the small clinic feel smaller still. Word of what happened traveled faster than Elandra expected. By the following afternoon, riders in the king's colors arrived at her door, and she learned, with no small amount of alarm, exactly who she had spent the night sewing back together. The Alpha King's son, the heir to Ashgard, a prince, bleeding on her table, calling her by name like it meant something enormous. The king himself arrived 2 days later, once Kael was strong enough to be moved, but insisted on staying until then. Aldrich Ashgard was a tall, weathered man, with the kind of quiet authority that made rooms go still when he entered them. He studied Elandra for a long moment before speaking. "You saved my son's life." "I did what any healer would do," she said. keeping her voice steady despite the way her heart pounded. Not many healers would have run toward that ambush instead of away from it. She had no answer for that, so she said nothing. The king's gaze shifted to his son, and something passed between them that Elandra could not read. Then, without further explanation, the king thanked her formally, offered her a reward she quietly declined, and left with his guard, taking Kael with him back toward the palace. Elandra told herself that was the end of it. A strange, frightening, oddly meaningful few days, and now life would return to its usual rhythm of splints and stitches, and rain against the clinic roof. It was not the end of it. 3 weeks later, Kael returned. Alone this time, without guards, dressed plainly enough that if she hadn't already memorized his face, she might not have recognized him as anything more than a traveler. "You shouldn't be here," she said, though she found she did not entirely mean it. "I needed to see you again." "You needed a healer, you mean? Are you hurt?" "No." He hesitated, and for a man who apparently commanded soldiers and sat at his father's council table, he looked remarkably unsure of himself. "I need to tell you something, and I don't know how to say it in a way that won't sound insane." Elandra crossed her arms. "Try me. I patch up insane people for a living." He almost smiled at that, but the seriousness in his eyes didn't fade. "The night you saved me. My wolf recognized something in you the moment I woke up and saw your face." "Recognized what?" "You," he said simply. "It recognized you as mine, as my fated mate, the one meant to stand beside me for the rest of my life." Elandra stared at him. For a long moment, the only sound was the rain, returning to tap against the roof, as if the sky itself was waiting to see what she would say. "That's not funny," she finally managed. "I'm not joking. I'm a rogue healer from the border. I don't have a pack. I don't have a title. I have bandages and herbs and a very small clinic that leaks when it storms." She gestured at the ceiling, where indeed a small drip had begun collecting in a bucket she kept for exactly that purpose. "I am not fated to be anyone's Luna." "Fate didn't ask either of us what made sense," Kael said quietly. "It just decided." She wanted to argue further, but something in her chest had already begun to shift. Some quiet recognition she hadn't wanted to name the first time she'd looked into his eyes, as he lay bleeding on her table. She had told herself it was simply the intensity of the moment. Now she wasn't so sure. "I need time," she said finally. "You can have as much as you need," he answered. "I'm not going to force anything on you. I just needed you to know the truth, whatever you decide to do with it." He left that evening, and Elandra spent the following days in a strange, unsettled quiet, going through the motions of her work while her mind returned again and again to his words. She was not a foolish woman. She understood what a claim like his would mean: a life at court, a title she never asked for, whispers from nobles who would see her only as an unworthy border healer who had somehow trapped their prince. But she also remembered the way her hands had known exactly what to do the night she found him bleeding, the way something in her had refused to let him die, long before she'd known his name meant anything at all. Word had already begun spreading through the territory, as these things always did. Not everyone was pleased. Some in the king's court believed the future Luna of Ashgard should come from a noble bloodline, someone trained in politics and court manners, not a woman who smelled of herbs and rainwater and had likely never worn a formal gown in her life. Whispers turned into something colder when a rival faction within the territory, hoping to weaken the king's line through scandal or tragedy, realized that removing Elandra might do more damage to Kael than any blade ever could. The attack came without warning, exactly the way the first one had. Elandra was walking back from delivering medicine to a nearby farm when 3 men stepped out from the tree line, weapons drawn, clearly expecting an easy target. She was no soldier, but she had grown up on the border, where survival depended on more than sword skill. She knew how a body moved, how to strike where it hurt most, how to use size and speed against someone larger than herself. She fought harder than she had ever fought in her life, and it was not enough on its own, but it did not need to be. Kael arrived before the fight could end badly, his wolf already surging forward the moment he caught the scent of her fear on the wind from half a mile away. What followed was fast and controlled, and over quickly, the attackers driven off or subdued, and Elandra left standing, breathless but alive, in the middle of the road where it all began. Kael reached her and gripped her shoulders, checking her over with a kind of desperate thoroughness that told her everything his words hadn't yet managed to say. "You're safe. You're safe." "I'm fine," she said, though her voice shook slightly. "I fought them off. You shouldn't have had to fight them at all." His jaw tightened. "This is because of me, because of what you are to me." "Then I suppose," Elandra said, catching her breath, "that makes me someone worth protecting too, doesn't it?" Something in his expression eased at that, like a weight had shifted, even slightly. The final confrontation, when it came, happened back at the clinic where everything had started. The same men who had orchestrated both attacks made one last attempt, believing that striking at the source of it all, the small building where their prince had first fallen for a rogue healer, would end things cleanly. They underestimated Elandra twice, first as a simple healer, then as merely the prince's mate. They did not survive underestimating her a third time. Between Kael's strength and Elandra's precise, practical knowledge of exactly where the body could be stopped without killing, the threat was ended before nightfall. Standing in the wreckage of her own clinic, bloodied but unbroken, Elandra finally understood that she was not choosing a title or a crown. She was choosing the same thing she had chosen the very first night, without knowing his name, or his birth, or what it would cost her, to stand beside someone and refuse to let them fall. The king arrived the following week, this time not to thank her formally, but to speak with her properly, as the woman his son intended to spend his life beside. He looked at her differently now, the way one looks at someone who has proven herself far beyond what any title could measure. "My son's wolf knew what he was, the moment he first saw you," Aldrich said. "It seems the rest of us are only now catching up." Elandra did not become Luna because of blood or court approval. She became Luna because she had already been saving Kael long before she knew there was a throne attached to him, and she would go on doing exactly that for the rest of their lives. Not as a title she wore, but as the truth she had always carried, quietly, in her own two capable hands.